Now, without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to our expert consultants to enlighten us on succession planning. Dr. Cami and Chris, please take it away.
I'll go ahead and jump in first. Welcome to succession planning and the start of a new year. Just a little bit of background on me. I've been consulting and training for more than 25 years in both the private and public sector, as well as some nonprofit work. And I've been with CPS now for 8 years. And I was talking with Marissa and Chris earlier. I was actually working on some succession profiles just this morning. So everything's fresh in my mind. I'm excited to share what we've learned and how to help you either get started or build on your existing program. So Chris, take it over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Atkinson. I'm a principal consultant at CPS HR. I've been in the industry for about 12 years or so, with CPS for about 7 of those. Prior to my time at CPS, I've worked in private sector HR departments, public sector HR departments, in the recruitment and succession planning arenas. At CPS, I'm in the organizational strategy unit, and a lot of the projects we are involved in are centered around succession planning, workforce planning, organizational assessment. Kimi and I have done a number of recent succession planning projects with organizations of a variety of different sizes, really, exclusively in the government arena. And that's a little bit about me. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so here's what we have on tap today. We're going to talk about the big area of, first, why is succession planning important? We'll give you some information that will help make the business case around that. The what does succession planning involve, and also the how. So we're going to get into some of our specific succession planning model and how we recommend going about entering into a succession planning initiative and sustaining momentum with succession planning. And then we'll also talk about a little bit of the common barriers and challenges that organizations likely encounter that we've seen as well. All right, but kind of first, to get a sense of where everyone's at in the spectrum of succession planning, let's take a quick poll first here. So the question is, where are you in your succession planning journey? No current program at all, under development, or an existing program? So that poll should pop up, be pretty intuitive about how to take here. Looks like we got 15 responses so far. All right, I'm going to go off camera. I'm having some bandwidth issues here.
Well, Chris, let me jump in. It looks like we're kind of like almost neck and neck on no current program or under development. Okay, so we've got 48 and 45% there, and then 7% have an existing program. So I'll be curious, either in the chat or in the questions, for those of you who have an existing program, what you're learning, what you're doing differently, any best practices or lessons learned that you might want to share. But again, the fact that most of you have no, or at least half of you, no current program, great. We can give you a roadmap as we go through today. And those who have under development, maybe there's a few questions or areas that you go, ooh, hadn't thought about that, and we can point you in the right direction.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
Just have to get rid of that poll, get it out of my way so I can see where I'm going. All right.
All right, so let's dive into the why behind succession planning. All right, great. So here is a poll that we recently conducted for some of our current clients, and we asked them, why they have recently started to work in the succession planning area. So 15% said it was related to a desire to fill executive positions, 19% around filling key technical or specialty, 25% regarding filling leadership pipeline kind of across the organization, 13% around the anticipated retirement bubble, and 29% related to increased employee engagement / retention. So really, succession planning, it's not just related to, leadership positions. I like to point out that key technical and specialty positions here. When we think about succession planning, we also can kind of intuitively equate it with leadership positions, but really it's, key positions, period. So whether that's if you're in a very technical department, there's certain individuals that are really kind of key for business continuity that we want to make sure that we're planning around and ensuring that there's continuity for those positions as well as leadership positions. And then 29% there, I think it's interesting that there's kind of these secondary effects related to succession planning. It's not just about, hey, let's just fill the positions, but it also helps increase engagement and retention with the current individuals that are in the succession planning, really if they even get promoted or not, because the organization is showing an active interest in developing them, which is more likely for them to experience heightened levels of engagement and retention. All right, so here's some of the benefits bullet by bullet. Number one, knowledge transfer. So during the succession planning program, when it's really active, let's say, there's an increased amount of knowledge transfer that's occurring between the individuals in these target roles and the individuals that are looking to aspire into them. There's a sense of continuity by having the same individuals within the organization take these higher level roles. So there's less negative impacts on the operations from a day-to-day standpoint. Stability, which kind of goes hand in hand with continuity, but even from an external standpoint, to have the same individuals remain in the organization and follow on up the organization, there can be a sense of external stability from the board members when they're looking into the organization. Retention, like I was talking about earlier, individuals that are being developed are more likely to want to stay within the organization. Development, we'll get into some of the specifics around development plans later, but kind of part and parcel of a succession planning program is the development plans and how that helps individuals grow their talent. And then lastly, like I've talked a little bit about employee engagement, there's a sense of individuals feeling more engaged in their job if they're actively being developed within their current role. All right, what is involved in succession planning? Okay, go ahead, Kimmy.
Okay. All right, so this is the 6-step model that we've been operating with. And again, it's talking about that leadership continuity. It's developing competencies, and it's a big piece of it is also creating a program that will be sustained. There's nothing worse and more frustrating and quite honestly kind of a waste of time and money than putting a program into place and then letting it fall apart 6 months later. So you want to make sure that you're building a really strong foundation. So we're going to break down each of these 6 steps in more detail. And we're also going to talk about what's the role of human resources and what's the role of the business unit. Because as we'll mention several times today, a lot of times when you think about succession planning, people go, oh, that's an HR project. Okay. And that sets up a whole interesting set of dynamics. So the first phase is all about identifying the key positions and competencies. So you don't have to tackle everybody all at once. You want to focus on the positions that are, most important. Again, that could be leadership, it could be technical, it could be because somebody's retiring. You want to really focus your efforts on where you're going to get the biggest impact to start with. And then the heaviest lift in terms of work is to create incumbent succession profiles. And I was saying, I was just working on some of that this morning with a client. And to do that, we want to identify what are the top, usually 9 to 10 competencies that incumbent needs to be successful in the role. We talk about if you get promoted or you win the lottery, what does your successor need to know to step into that position and be as effective as possible? While we're capturing those competencies, we're also looking at, well, okay, how would you develop those competencies in someone? It could be training, it could be mentoring, it could be shadowing, it's having them join associations, maybe it's getting certificates. A lot of times it's good old-fashioned coaching and mentoring, and it's giving them hands-on experience, specific assignments, draft the budget, and then we'll review it, create the presentation, deliver the presentation, go out and conduct a site visit, whatever it is, but to really get them immersed in the information. Now, we've used in the past a 3x3 model. Okay, so this is where it's either the 9 or the 10 competencies. Rather than asking you out of the blue, say, what are the top 9 competencies that are important? We break it into these 3 categories. What are 3 leadership or people management skills that are important? What are 3 business or operational competencies that the person needs to be successful? And what technical knowledge or expertise do they need to bring to this particular position? Remember that this is not recreating a job description, but we're really focusing on the key competencies. Now, there will be some behaviors similar to what you would put on a job description, but we don't want to duplicate it. We really want to take the cream of the crop and move forward. Okay. So here's an example of an operations manager and the leadership, business, and technical skills that he identified. So you can see it's the daily supervision, it's communication, performance management, judgment, customer service, project management. And then you can see that on the technical side, it can get very, it can be broad, but very specific. So I need to know my company's infrastructure. In this case, it was a water company. So they need to know about the pipes and the pumps and the tanks. Okay? Safety and regulatory compliance and policies and procedures. Again, remember, it's going to be very unique. We're not trying to create a job description for all operations managers like we would with a job description, but it's like to take this person's job right now in this organization with the resources and issues that we have going. So once we identify the competencies, then we want to talk about, well, what do you do to demonstrate that competency? So are you discussing things? Are you coaching? Are you delegating? Are you researching, mediating, prioritizing? It's that action verb statement that you'll see in some of the examples coming up. And then the second level is we want to dig a little bit deeper and say, well, what makes you successful? Is there a particular style that you take? Is there a particular way that you communicate? What kind of emotional intelligence or humility or persistence or interest do you take in your people? And if we still haven't quite gotten a really good set of behaviors that we're looking at, we ask, well, what do you wish you knew before you took the job? Oh, I wish somebody would have told me that I have to make this many presentations, or I wish I'd had more software training so I was more adept at doing whatever it is. Okay. So there's a lot of different approaches, but what you want to do at the end is create a roadmap for your aspiring leader or your aspiring successor, your potential successor, to fill in for you. Okay, so here's just an example of the greater detail. So we have safety and regulatory compliance as the competency. We ask the incumbent to define what that means for them. Okay, so again, it's not just a generic description, but it's like, what does it mean in this role? And then you see, and this is an abbreviated version, but you see these 5 behaviors. So I reinforce the culture of safety by doing these things. I maintain awareness, or I stay up to date on industry news. I'm familiar with policies and procedures in the district. Okay. I'm always reviewing and discussing permits. Okay. So again, you can see that now we have a set of behaviors that your potential successor evaluates themselves against. How prepared am I to do this? How much level of understanding or knowledge do I have? And how much experience can I bring forth? And you'll see later on in the model that then that information leads to a development plan. Okay. I'd mentioned before that not only do we want to capture the behaviors that we're expecting of people, but how would we develop it? So we provide this section for each competency that says, how would I learn to be better at safety and regulatory compliance? Well, I'm going to get on the job training. I'm going to lead safety meetings. I'm going to participate in these particular organizations. I'm going to go to these industry meetings. And by doing that, that will develop my safety and regulatory compliance competency so I can step in to that position. So we talked about kind of the 3 buckets of how to acquire those competencies. It could be formal training and certifications. You take a class, you listen to a webinar like today. Okay. Most likely, the majority of it is going to be coaching or mentoring or shadowing. I'm going to sit in on meetings with my supervisor to see how he or she runs it. What questions do they ask? What data did they use? Why did they not say this? What was the strategy behind it? And that's where I really start to pick up on some of the intricacies of the job that go way beyond any job description that I could read. But there are other cases too where I need to get out in the field. I need to turn the wrench. I need to flip the switch. I need to read the blueprint. I need to, read the legislation and decide how we're going to interpret it. And there's no substitute for that hands-on practice. So in terms of HR at this phase, if you can offer workforce planning information, so let the department know that, okay, you've got 8 people who are eligible to retire. Start talking to them and see if they're going to go. Okay. You're also probably going to be assisting at least with establishing the project scope. So how many positions are we going to tackle in this first round? Who's the most urgent? What's the priority? Okay. And then probably you'll be helping with the communication plan. You can see that the lion's share of the work here, though, falls to the business unit. That's what BU is, business unit. So they need to figure out what critical positions do they have. And like Sally is the only one who knows how to work that machine. Okay. Maybe, again, upcoming retirements or promotions. The one client we're working with right now, there's a lot of movement because people are being promoted. So last year they were an aspiring leader. Now they're an incumbent leader, so we got a lot of movement going on. There may be regulations or industry changes that are coming down the pipe, and you need to be prepared for that. So what skills do we need to be adding in? What positions do we need to be hiring for? And then you identify the most critical competencies and make sure you dedicate time to create those incumbent profiles, because that really drives everything else that happens.
All right, let's get into phase 2 here, identifying candidates. So the first piece of this phase is to identify if there's going to be any minimum eligibility requirements, such as a minimum years of experience or time in a position, minimum performance review standards, if there's licenses for more technical positions. So this can kind of range the gamut in terms of what we've seen. So in some cases, we've had one client that's just really anybody that reports into an incumbent leader is defined as an aspiring leader and is then therefore a candidate in the pool. Other times there can be more of a formal process where individuals are rated on performance and potential in order to be considered a part of the pool, the common 9 box, if you guys are familiar with that. Next is to make sure that you're considering the amount of resources in terms of time and money that you really have when identifying the number of individuals that can be a part of each wave. And I wanted to point out, it's depending upon the size of your organization too. This can be done in a very phase 2 can be done in a phased approach. So identifying candidates for the initial tranche of individuals to be in the succession planning pool, you might select incumbent leader positions that are those that report into the very top of the organization. And then in subsequent phases, go further down the organization in terms of identifying these incumbent leaders and the corresponding aspiring leaders into these positions. So you don't have to do the whole organization all at the same time. Next is looking at creating and revising any policies. So an important point about this phase is whatever criteria is used to identify individuals that become a part of the succession planning pool, that needs to be done in a consistent and transparent fashion. So to the extent that then would mean the creation of any policies about who is eligible to participate versus who isn't, that should be documented as such. And then lastly, creating any realistic expectations about promotion. So the succession planning program is, of course, not a guarantee of if you're in the talent pool, that means you're going to get promoted, right? It's really to be thought of in terms of if you are in the succession planning program, you are, a candidate for potential promotion when that position becomes vacant or that incumbent leader retires. But it's not a guarantee. It's just kind of a training program to begin to be prepared for assuming a position as it's available.
Right. And let me just add there that a lot of times I hear people say it will make you more competitive for the position having that development.
So in terms of HR here, another point I wanted to point out is it's important to, along the same lines as we were talking a little bit about in terms of the policy development, but make sure that the communication around the identification of individuals to be in the succession planning program is clear, is consistent. This is a very these projects tend to be very change management communication heavy, because it really is it's almost, if you're doing it right, it's kind of a cultural change in a sense, in terms of if this is going to become a part of your, run the operations in the same way that if you are we're working with a large water treatment operation, and they look at their maintenance of their facilities and and capital improvements as something that needs to happen just to kind of run the business, so to speak. If a succession planning program is done right and it's integrated into everything the business is doing, it needs to have a lot of communication around what's happening, who is involved, why. So the more that you can standardize the communication around this process, the more successful it's likely to be. On the BU side, looking at reviewing the performance track record is potentially a minimum eligibility criteria that can be important. And then lastly, looking at if there's, and this is kind of on an individual to individual position basis, if there are certain positions that will need a longer run time to get people up to speed. Let's say it's a very technical oriented position that's maybe selected as a target position. You may want to be thinking about prioritizing certain positions like that over others, because they may need individuals to be developed for these particular positions over a longer time horizon than other ones.
So let's take another quick poll. When you think about, we listed it here as candidate selection, but it's like, when you think about what's that first wave of people, how many positions are you going to be tackling? What's the biggest driver or concern that you have there? Is it, do you have the funding? Is it, do you or the candidates have the workload or the bandwidth to make it happen? Is it urgent? We've got a lot of people leaving, a lot of people promoting. Or is it, how do I make sure that we're being fair and equitable in our, in our decisions about who goes first? About half of the votes in so far. So it looks like kind of the workload bandwidth is in the lead, but closely followed by urgency. Okay, again, both very important and often intertwined. And then around 10 to 15% evenly on the funding and fairness. Okay, good. Yeah, like I say, this is a process where you need commitment at all levels of the organization to make it happen, because there is some heavy lifting, but the payoff is enormous. But you can't go into it thinking it's going to, so it's like, oh, I'll do that in 15 minutes a day. Probably not going to work. So it's definitely an investment and a commitment and a strategic decision in terms of how you tackle succession planning. Let's keep on trucking through the model.
All right.
So how does it actually work? Yeah.
Into phase 3 here. So phase 3 is evaluate the skills gap. So this next piece is around developing or really selecting a methodology that includes a self and or supervisory assessment of the candidate's level of readiness. So we'll get into what specifically that looks like in some examples, but really the way to collect this information is either through some type of interview process or perhaps a survey that we've started to do more recently. And we'll talk about what that looks like. Then what we're looking to do is, once we've identified the candidate's level of readiness to succeed into these potential positions, we're looking at comparing these skill gaps to the current training offerings that are offered by your organization. And through that process, we can identify additional needs potentially. So especially if you have a larger organization, and you have a lot of aspiring leaders in this program, there can be certain trends. For instance, let's say there's identified that there are a lot of these assessments that a competency that individuals score relatively low on is a project management competency. So then therefore it might make sense to bring in some type of training and development program that's used across the organization around project management. So a common set of tools and processes is used around project management, and everyone's educated on that framework, which could be helpful for several individuals in the organization. The other thing that's important to do is prioritize the certain developmental needs. So we'll get into the development planning piece of this, but it's important to, can be potentially a lot of different areas for individuals to put on their development plan, but it's important to look at, what are the most critical and important competencies to put into your development plan. All right, so here we're going to get into the actual assessment that we've used with several organizations, looking at the successors, or as we call them, aspiring leaders as well. So first, for each competency, we are going to have individuals rate themselves on their level of knowledge of that competency. So this is the awareness and understanding of that actual competency, and then also the application. So this is their extent to which they can actually really perform and complete work associated with these certain competencies. So then the next layer is looking at, we're going to have each individual rate themselves on each knowledge and application, either on a low, medium, or high scale. We found that this kind of 3-point scale is kind of the right blend of level of granularity. A 10-point scale would get a little bit too detailed. A high, medium, or low is easier for people to wrap their heads around and differentiate the competencies on the assessment. So that's kind of the scale that we've really tended to use here. All right, so here is a sample successor survey. This particular example is looking at a customer and user focus competency. So this is the extent to the individual's ability to address staff user needs in a timely manner to ensure that it can be effective and efficient. How the competency is demonstrated. Again, this is information pulled directly from that incumbent leader profile. So the greater detail section here is folded under that 1 through 7 there that just describes in more concrete terms how that competency can really be seen on the job on a daily basis. And then we have the knowledge of that competency on the left-hand side there, as well as the application. And then the individual is rated as lower, moderate, or high. So they would simply just fill in the bubbles there on that survey, and they would go through, each of the 9 competencies. Here is that same competency, and basically here we're showing the output of the survey. We're talking about, in this case, the individual rated themselves as high on the knowledge for customer focus, as well as high on the application there. And here's the full output of the survey. So here's the 9 competencies for that particular profile, rated on the knowledge and the application. As you can see, there's a variety of different scores there across the board. A couple key points about how to think about this self-assessment here. Number one, it's really, and this is part of the communication that would occur before the individual takes the survey, as well as in the survey tool itself. We really stress that this is designed to be an honest assessment of someone's proficiency, to not artificially inflate to make themselves look good, because it's important that individuals, right where they really are. That way, when it comes time to the development plan, they have a real good idea about, what areas they need to pick to put on their development plan. So along these same lines, it's important to emphasize, it's not used for performance evaluation at all. This is, not to be used in the case of eventually selecting an individual for that potential role they're trying to succeed into at a later point. It's purely for the basis of the development planning process that occurs later. And then bullet 3 there kind of alludes to what I was talking about earlier in terms of that project management example, is that these scores can then be used kind of at a programmatic level to understand where there's certain gaps in terms of people's if there's lots of project management competencies across these successor profiles, like I was talking about, and folks tend to score lower on that, that could be an area that's right for developing some type of development planning process or training curriculum that's specific to certain competencies across the board. To recap phase 3 here, looking at the BU side, it's important to look at the near future skill needs as well, and making sure that there is eligible candidates participating. We want to really strongly encourage individuals to participate. In one organization we've worked at, the same one, that they had basically selected anybody that is a that reports into one of the incumbent leaders slash target positions that they would be considered within the succession planning pool, and they had to opt out of the process if they didn't want to participate. So it's a different approach, and that particular approach encouraged a higher pool of individuals. That organization didn't need to be as maybe restrictive on individuals that they selected into their pool. So there's different ways in which participation can be encouraged, that just being one of them. And go ahead.
Okay. All right. So we've got our profile. We've had our potential successors fill out their profiles. Now it's time to create the development plans. And again, that's all about addressing any of the gaps that they identified in their self-evaluation. We've already talked about basically the 3 buckets of development opportunities. So you just need to think through based on, John's self-evaluation. You look at it and you figure out what's going to be the best way to move him to that next level. Okay. So for example, if we looked at this IT analyst profile, as the incumbent leader, I would look at customer focus, high scores. I'd say, okay, he knows about it, he can apply it. That's probably not a high priority development need. Let's move on to something else. We look at time management. Well, he knows quite a bit about it, but he's not really good at applying it. So that might be a target for us to focus on. But I'd want to have a discussion with him about, well, what part of this competency do you want to work on most? It's not going to be a one size fits all. I don't want to send him to 8 classes if all he really needs to do is focus on this one teeny tiny little piece. Okay. Same thing with network knowledge. Okay, we've got moderate and moderate. Now that might rise to the point where I want to develop those skills if network knowledge is super critical. If that's like a nice to have, then maybe it goes down lower on the priority. But when I see GIS support, it's low knowledge, low application. Clearly, it's important enough to make it on the profile. Chances are that would be one of the areas I'd want to focus on first and really get those development activities started. So it's going to be very individual to the person, to the department needs, to any future needs that they're anticipating. Okay. So when you're going through that thought process in terms of what do I want to select to put on the development plan, think about, is there an urgent or high priority need, or do we have more time and we should focus on other areas? Is there anyone else with that capability? So if Bill is leaving and John's going to be the only one, okay, that changes the priority. But if there's 2 or 3 other people who can kind of fill in for Bill after he goes, then I move it down on the list. Is there a broad skill gap? Chris has talked many times about lots of people need the same skill. Let's build that up for the organization. Think about how steep is the learning curve. Is this something I can master in 2 weeks, or is it more like 2 years? And how much support from you, the incumbent leader, is that person going to need? And do you have that bandwidth, okay, which is number 6? Okay. How long is it going to take me to reach proficiency or mastery? Again, do I need to go to school so I'm at least a couple years out? Is it something that I can, learn on the fly? Okay. So it's all just various ways to think about what's going to be my top priority to put on this person's development plan. Okay. So as I said, when you're co-creating, that's very important, co-creating the development plan, I want to talk about the self-ratings. Why did you say low? Why did you say high? Tell me more about it so we can really pinpoint the specific areas we want to focus on. I want to look at the highest priorities. And again, which one of those development strategies make the most sense? Is it going to be, I just need to sit down and coach him? Is it going to be that she needs to shadow me on the job and kind of learn the intricacies behind the scenes? Or is it, I just need to give them some projects to manage? We talk about it, send them back out there, come back in for a debrief. So anytime we're putting the development plan together, we want to make sure we've got a timeline and deadline. Otherwise, it's always when I get around to it, after I get my real job done. It's got to be a priority. And to make that happen, as the manager, you sometimes need to adjust workload to allow time for the training, for attending all those new meetings, for taking on new projects. Okay. And then it's also important to always be revisiting the plan. to make adjustments as needed. Maybe the direction has changed, maybe resources have changed, maybe somebody else has left the organization. So you want to stay on top of it. It's not etched in stone. It's definitely a work in progress. So on the HR side, you can help with the creating the development plans, maybe, figuring out, what skills are needed, how that aligns with your training. But the point is to, again, co-create, get them involved. Don't just dictate it, prioritize things, and make sure that you're considering workload considerations, because this can't be, 8 hours on top of the, 12 hours they're already doing, every day. So you really need to figure out where your strategically where your priorities lie.
All right, phase 5, providing training and mentoring. So so far in all the various phases, we've kind of been leading up to this point. We identified the key positions, identified what the important competencies were, developed the development plans for these individuals. So now we're kind of really engaging in the pieces of the puzzle that are going to, increase the skills and abilities of these individuals so that they can take on these successive positions here. So we've identified the priority training needs really mostly in the development planning process here. We've also evaluated common topics across positions. So like I was going back to that project management example, in terms of identifying if there are certain competencies that could benefit from a large number of individuals receiving development opportunities within certain areas. And then lastly here, allocating the necessary time and support. So like Cami was kind of alluding to, it's important to, first, I think this comes in terms of prioritizing what the most critical competencies are, and then the corresponding development opportunities. And then on a day-to-day basis, adjustments will likely need to be made in terms of if someone has to attend a week-long training here or there, who's going to cover for the work that they're not able to complete during that week, or if there's, often assignments, maybe stretch assignments or projects that are taking place that occur, obviously within the course of a normal work day, there may need to be adjustments and pieces, maybe of projects that they maybe can't take that someone else would need to take, or reschedule some of these projects or initiatives that they would have otherwise normally be doing. Another thing that can happen too that's interesting is if there is some larger projects that may be stretch assignments for multiple individuals that could benefit the organization. Maybe some of these quadrant 2, maybe not super urgent but important items that certain individuals could group together to complete that would satisfy multiple individuals' development plans. We see that happen in organizations. That can be a benefit really to the organization, of course, but then also from a development standpoint too. So this is a snapshot of our database that we sometimes create with clients. So what this does is, through this process, we've talked a lot about the different types of information we're going to be gathering from the key incumbent profiles, the various competencies and the definitions, as well as the aspiring leader rating. So oftentimes, if you have a system, an HRIS system that can accommodate this type of information, we'd recommend using that. With other clients that don't, we have a format that we've used in Excel to capture this information. So just kind of going left to right here about what we're looking at on screen. So first over here, this is a sample profile really. So you have the various competency categories over there on the left initially, and then the competencies themselves, the detailed description there in column 3. And then what we often do is categorize the different types of recommended development opportunities into 3 different categories: the formal training, mentoring, shadowing, and on-the-job training and practice. So this allows us to kind of track the information, 1, but then also 2, do any analysis that could be useful, like understanding that project management, for instance, was a competency that was frequently cited. If we have all the profiles in this database, we can do that analysis. The other thing it is helpful to do too sometimes is, there's a variety of different things you could explore with the data like this, but just as another quick example, one of the things from one client that we looked at that had a large number of people in their succession planning program, we were able to identify that mentoring was a very frequently cited type or method of developmental development. And so we then made the business case that said, okay, X percentage of these development plans are in need of some type of mentoring component. And so therefore we should create some type of formal mentoring program that gives enough guidance and structure to individuals to, one, be for those individuals that would become a mentor, how do you become a mentor? And then two, for individuals that are then going to be the mentees, how is that best done? And how do you make that relationship successful, and then training to these things so there was a common understanding about what it's like to be a mentor and a mentee and the expectations surrounding that. Just wrapping up phase 5 here. The second bullet under HR, I think it kind of goes a little bit to what I was just talking about in terms of the mentoring program. Really at the end of the day, some type of mentoring is likely going to be, whether it's a formal or informal or large or small part, it's likely going to be a component of many individuals' development plans. So to the extent that and mentoring, involves a fair amount of coaching, right? So to the extent that individuals can be better able to coach individuals, aspiring successors, the more successful your program is likely to be. So there are certain ways and programs in which you wish to do that, like the mentoring program, like I was talking about, can be valuable. On the VU side, allocating time and resources for the variety of different types of developmental opportunities. That's why we spend a lot of time on trying to extract what these developmental opportunities are during the incumbent leader profile phase, to make sure that the right types of developmental opportunities are presented so that people can really choose the one that's best going to fit their particular developmental needs. And this quote here by Richard Branson, we like quite a bit. He's a wise man. He says, train people well enough so that they can leave, treat them well enough so that they don't want to. So this is kind of a, interesting dichotomy, or that speaks to some people's fear of investing the time into developing individuals. The thought being, well, if we spend all this time developing folks, then what if they just take all those skills that they've learned through the succession planning program and use them to go get a job elsewhere? We encourage you not to think about that in that way, but more around the idea if individuals are being developed, they're more likely to want to remain with the organization to continue being developed.
And let me just throw in the corollary side of that, which I think was Henry Ford, which is like, well, the only thing worse than training them and they leave is not training them and they stay. So keep that one in mind as well.
All right, number 6 here, monitoring progress. So it's important to, once the program has really kind of gained its footing here and you've begun step 5 in terms of actually executing on the development plans, et cetera, like I was talking about a little bit earlier, it's important to treat this as part of your daily operations within your business. And we'll dive into that with step 6 here. So 1 is to check in with the successors on a regular basis to ensure they're on track and making progress. We don't want to just send people off on the phase 5 there and then never, revisit the progress that they've made or where they're at. There's a variety of different, we have a succession planning toolkit we're working on revising, and part of that in there talks about a variety of different metrics, really kind of straightforward metrics in terms of people's progress on their succession plan, how many individuals are in the program. The more visibility you can create with the succession planning program in terms of what folks are doing and the progress that they're making, the better. Also citing if individuals have been promoted into a position because of the succession planning program can help reinforce the momentum. So, I mean, this is a long-term program and it needs to be thought of as such. And so the extent to which you can continue providing the organization like the benefits of what's occurring, I think the better. Number 2 there, providing guidance, resources as needed. As new individuals enter the program, they're going to need maybe different training resources than what's been needed in the past. So it's important to monitor what the ongoing needs are of the program and support the program as needed. Making developmental plan adjustments as needed. So as individuals may continue on to several years in the program, they may in year one have focused on a couple competencies, and then perhaps they've gained a significant amount of proficiency within these. So when it comes to development planning in subsequent years, there may be different competencies that are going to be more important. So that can be an ongoing process, really. Under HR there, the first bullet, like I was describing, researching additional training sources as new needs come up can be important. There's always new training options that are being constantly brought to light, or new competencies that need training that didn't before. Like AI jumps to mind is very hot right now. So, that can be important to continue to reevaluate. On the BU side, conducting frequent conversations about progress, career plan changes as competencies are continually developed. There's, take the next one down the list if other competencies need to be developed after certain ones have reached a certain level of competence. That's important to do as well.
Let's bring it home here so we have a few minutes left for questions at the end. There's a lot of, barriers and challenges that you might face, but there's also really easy success factors or remedies to put into place. One of the big challenges I see clients having is there's a lack of urgency. Prime example, one of our clients has known that their director of finance was planning on leaving, and it's been like 2 years. And now all of a sudden she's leaving 6 months from now, and there's a mad scramble to get somebody to come in and fill her position. There's no chance that they can develop their internal candidate. So it's definitely going to be an external search. Okay. Which again, there's nothing wrong with that, but I know that wasn't their initial intention. So you definitely want to plan ahead and allow plenty of time to create that development plan. If you can, wherever possible, allow some overlap between when the new person takes over and the old person leaves, so you can really get that knowledge transfer piece going on versus, good luck with that, right? Talent migration, again, we talked about, if you're not developing me, if I'm not happy, I'm going to leave. So if you've got succession planning in place and you're providing me with that training, that's more retention, that's more engagement. Okay, so don't let the good ones get away without taking a crack at keeping them there. There's sometimes a lack of trust or perceived bias. Okay, so let's break that into two pieces. The trust is, if I create this profile and tell you all my secrets to being successful, somehow that's going to come back and hurt me. So the incumbents are a little bit nervous. And then on the successor side, there's a perceived bias. Oh, they'll never promote me. They've already got, Marilyn in mind. All right. So you want to be really transparent, have an objective process, keep everything above board, really talk about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and repeat it umpteen times. As you all know, you think you're over communicating, but that's almost impossible. Okay? And as I'd mentioned very early in the talk today, it's sometimes succession planning is viewed as an HR initiative. But you can see from the various slides that the business units have a huge responsibility, and we need them to be committed and really invested in making this work, because HR can't do it on their own. They certainly can't sustain it, and they can't do the heavy lifting behind the scenes that the business units need to do to make this work. It's a little bit of a case of the Jerry Maguire, help me, help you. Okay, so make sure you're always talking about what's in it for the business unit and for the potential successors as you're going through this sometimes arduous process. Right? Don't want to make the process too complicated. So again, communicate everything clearly, do a phased approach. Don't bite off, oh, we're going to do 50 positions. That's a lot of work. What are the top 10 or 12 that you want to start with maybe? Okay. There's going to be unpredictable needs. Things are going to change. You're going to have movement in the organization, industry, political, environmental conditions are going to come in. So just keep an eye on things and change those profiles and development plans as needed. And then finally, as we talked early on, that a lot of times succession planning focuses on moving people into leadership positions. So when you do move them into those positions, make sure they've got the support they need to make that transition. Because being an individual contributor is a lot different than being a supervisor or a manager or a VP. A lot of the skills that you had before don't really apply, and you have to develop some other new ones really, really quick. So just keep that in mind as part of the development process. So this last little piece here, I just want to leave this with you as a tool that you can use to kind of evaluate where you are, where your organization is in terms of succession readiness. And this could also be a little bit of a, let's go talk to the executives about what we need and where we are. So make sure you've got the executive leadership support, figure out what those key jobs are that you want to focus on, define those competencies, figure out how you're going to evaluate the skill gap, interviews, surveys, some other methodology, co-create the development roadmap to close the skill gap, make sure your training suits or is aligned with those competencies, and then just think about the resources, the workload, the time needed, the training, any equipment, any new software or hardware. And if you evaluate all of those pieces, at least you know what's coming and it sets you up for success. So I'm curious, and if you can put it in the chat, I'd love to see, but I'm just curious, what's your biggest takeaway from our discussion of walking you through the model today? It helps us kind of figure out what really resonates with people so we can emphasize that and make the presentation even better the next go round.
I'll just start with our first one, which I think is a fair question. All right, this attendee said, I am the only person who does my job anywhere in my state. The job was created about 7 years ago, and it took me 35 years of unique experiences to become qualified for it. I can't find bring on to start to learn and develop. I'd like to be able to take a vacation. How can I find somebody? I've been keeping my eyes open for 7 years. I'd hate for my job to disappear if I retire. Do you have any advice for this person? That sounds like they have a very unique job with this certain set of skills.
And oddly enough, it's kind of a common occurrence. And even though like yours, it may be a very unique job, that circumstance happens quite a bit. And again, there's no silver bullet there. My suggestion might be to think about how could you divvy up your job and give smaller pieces to some people that you're probably not going to find another unicorn like yourself, but it's just like, how could you share some of that knowledge so that the process can keep moving while you're gone? The other thing that comes to mind, as much as you can, again, I don't know how technical your job is, but can you create some kind of a desk manual that someone could use in your absence to keep the wheels turning? They may not be able to take on the big questions, but at least, the building would still be standing when you come back. Those are the first two thoughts that come to mind. I'd be happy to, talk more with you about it if you want to. My contact information is there. Chris, do you have anything else to add?
Anything more? Yeah, that was my first reaction too, is try to break the job up into into the extent that you can, because yeah, in situations like that, it may be difficult to replace your position on a one-for-one basis.
All right, thank you guys. Next question. This is referring to one of your slides. In key phase number 2, one of the listed responsibilities for HR was to view candidates through a DEI lens. What does that mean, practically speaking?
That's just, it's a little bit of a safety valve that, depending on how you have selected the participants, like who's eligible to participate in the process, just make sure that there's no inherent bias going on there, that it's just like that it was an objective decision about who could participate. It's not just my best friends, but it's everybody who has this many years of experience, or this long in the job, or this particular certification. It's just to make sure there's nothing untoward going on with your candidate pool.
Great, thank you, Cami. We had a question come in the chat. Any tips on how to approach someone about their retirement date?
Well, here's what I can say. Again, one of the clients that we just recently worked with, that was part of their profile interview session at the end when we were sitting down with the manager to, review the profile we created just to make sure everything made sense. We hadn't left out any components. They literally just said, what are your retirement plans? It's just like, it's like we all know when you're eligible, but what are you looking at? Fortunately for that organization, most people were on like the 5 to 7 year plan. Now we know that can change in a heartbeat, but that was the plan. So they know what their time horizon is. Versus the other client, as I'd mentioned with the director of finance, who says, I'm out of here in April. So you best get your ducks in a row and get somebody in here so I can start training them.
Thank you, Cami. All right, we have one more, and this will be our last question that just came in the chat. What is the success rate for 3x3 succession model? And which organizations utilize this approach, if you could provide any examples?
I'll let Chris take that one.
The success rate. Well, I like to think of every client that we've used the 3x3 grid with being successful. In terms of clients that we've most recently worked with in the last couple of years, I won't just like give out the names, but I can give out, I guess, some generalities about them. Work with one very large water district in Southern California. There's a bunch of larger water districts down there. It's one of them. And then we also have a really small water district, like under like maybe 50 or so people in the Bay Area we've been working with, and then another special district, a different special district within the Bay Area that we've most recently used this model with as well.
And let me just say that the 9 isn't necessarily a magic number, but we found that otherwise they're going to list 50, and we really want to get the most critical. There's going to be a lot of other content underneath it, but if we can keep them focused on those big areas, that seems to provide enough of a framework to give people a manageable amount of information on which to create their development plans.
Thank you both. And that'll wrap up our webinar for today. So thank you again for being here. Thank you for everyone attending, and we hope to see you next month.